Miguel had always believed that life in the countryside was a test of patience and resilience. Since childhood, he had heard his father say that the land was generous to those who treated it with respect, but unforgiving to those who underestimated it. Over the years, he had learned this lesson the hard way. The relentless labor under the scorching sun, the droughts that threatened to destroy his crops, and the sudden rains that often washed away part of his harvest had all become an inseparable part of his existence. He woke up before the first ray of sunlight touched the horizon, breathing in the scent of damp earth and listening to the birds announcing a new day. His wife, Helena, would already be brewing strong coffee while their children remained asleep, blissfully unaware of the burdens that rested on their father's shoulders. Money was tight, carefully budgeted, and each harvest was a precarious gamble against the whims of nature. Despite the hardships, Miguel never allowed himself to give up. He saw the land not just as a means of survival, but as a part of who he was. Even on the hardest days, when exhaustion gnawed at his muscles, he found comfort in knowing that his effort would secure a better future for his family. But fate has a way of surprising even the most dedicated workers. And for Miguel, that surprise would come in a way he could never have imagined. The day had unfolded like any other, each hour dictated by the rhythm of the land, the weight of the sun, and the silent understanding that hard work was the only guarantee of survival. Miguel had spent the afternoon tending to his crops, his hands moving with the practiced precision of a man who had repeated the same motions thousands of times. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting elongated shadows over the fields, he gathered his tools, sighing as he anticipated the familiar ache in his muscles that would accompany him through the evening. But then something caught his eye, an anomaly in the otherwise predictable landscape. At first, he thought it was just another rock, one of the many he had unearthed over the years, stubborn intrusions that made his work harder. But as he moved closer, he hesitated. This wasn't an ordinary stone. Half buried in the soil, it had a strange metallic sheen that reflected the dying light in an eerie way. The surface was irregular, both smooth and jagged in places, as if it had been violently shaped by forces unknown. Kneeling down, Miguel reached out hesitantly, brushing away the loose dirt with his fingers. The moment his skin made contact, a subtle but undeniable chill crept up his arm, sending a ripple of unease through him. The rock felt unnaturally dense, heavier than any stone of its size should be. His instincts told him that this was something foreign, something that did not belong to the earth he had cultivated for so many years. He tightened his grip and attempted to lift it, expecting resistance. The sheer weight of the object surprised him, its mass far greater than its modest dimensions suggested. As he pulled it free from the soil, dust and pebbles scattered around him, revealing more of its dark, burnished surface. Holding it in his hands, he noticed an odd sensation, a faint vibration, or perhaps just a trick of his tired mind. For a long moment Miguel remained motionless, staring at the strange object in his grasp. An inexplicable sense of significance hung in the air, as though he had unearthed something that had been waiting undisturbed for centuries. The wind had fallen silent, the usual rustling of the crops momentarily absent, as if the very land around him was holding its breath. He knew rocks. He knew the soil. He knew the patterns of nature that dictated his existence, but this was something beyond his understanding, and as he stood there, gripping the heavy fragment of an unknown past, he had no way of knowing that his life, rooted for so long in the familiar cycles of the earth, had just taken a turn that would shatter everything he thought he knew. Miguel couldn't shake the feeling that the object he had unearthed was something extraordinary. Though he knew little about metals or minerals, instinct told him this was no ordinary rock. Over the next few days, he found himself staring at it. Whenever he had a moment to spare, running his fingers over its peculiar surface, feeling the inexplicable weight that seemed disproportionate to its size. His wife, Helena, urged him to take it to someone who might know more, and after much hesitation, he decided to follow her advice. Traveling to the nearest city, Miguel carried the rock in an old burlap sack, its sheer weight making the journey more arduous than expected. He sought out a local geologist, a professor at the university, who agreed to take a look out of sheer curiosity. As Miguel unwrapped the rock and placed it on the scientist's desk, the man's casual demeanor shifted. Almost instantly, he leaned in, adjusting his glasses, running his hands over the dark metallic surface before quickly fetching a set of instruments. As the minutes stretched into hours, Miguel watched as the professor's initial intrigue turned into something more profound, something bordering on disbelief. Samples were taken, measurements recorded, calculations scribbled hastily into a notebook. The man murmured to himself, comparing data against reference charts, his fingers trembling slightly as he conducted test after test. Finally, the professor sat back, exhaling slowly, as if the weight of revelation had just settled upon him. "Miguel," he began carefully, his voice steady but laced with awe. "This is not just metal. This is not from here." Miguel frowned. "Not from here? You mean from another region?" The professor shook his head. "No, Miguel. I mean, not from Earth." The words hung in the air, almost too surreal to grasp. Miguel blinked, struggling to process what had just been said. "This is a meteorite," the professor continued, tapping the rock's surface. "But not just any meteorite. It contains an alloy we've never encountered before, an extremely rare composition with traces of elements that are either incredibly scarce on Earth or completely unknown in our current scientific models. The density, the weight, the molecular structure, this could be one of the most valuable extraterrestrial materials ever discovered." Miguel felt the ground shift beneath him. He had spent his life harvesting from the land, his entire existence shaped by the soil, the rain, and the cycles of nature. Yet here in his hands was something that had traveled through the infinite vastness of space, something beyond the comprehension of the world he had always known. The professor's voice broke through his thoughts. "If this is what I think, it is. Museums, collectors, even government agencies would be willing to pay millions for it. You might be holding a scientific treasure worth more than you can imagine." Miguel swallowed hard. Just days ago, he had been worrying about the next harvest, about whether he'd have enough to provide for his family. Now, with this single discovery, everything had changed. The life he had always known was no longer the same, and for the first time, he realized that fate had handed him something far greater than mere chance. It had given him a doorway to a future he never thought possible. News of Miguel's discovery spread like wildfire. Within days, journalists, scientists, and collectors from across the country, and even from abroad, began reaching out, eager to learn more about the mysterious meteorite. Calls poured in, offers escalated, and suddenly Miguel found himself at the center of a whirlwind he had never imagined. The quiet life he had always known, waking before dawn, tending to his crops, measuring each harvest with cautious optimism, had been replaced by something surreal. At first, he struggled to grasp the magnitude of what was happening. Scientists confirmed that the meteorite contained an ultra-rare metallic compound, a material so scarce that even a small fragment could be worth a fortune. Private collectors and government institutions alike placed bids, some offering amounts so staggering that Miguel had to ask them to repeat themselves, convinced he had misheard. Within a matter of weeks, he was no longer just an ordinary farmer. He was a man in possession of one of the most valuable extraterrestrial artifacts ever found. The decision to sell did not come easily, though the money could change everything. For his family, he felt a strange connection to the object, as if it had been placed in his hands for a reason. But ultimately, Miguel knew that his life was not among scientists and laboratories. It was here, on the land where he had been raised, where he had built his home, where he had struggled and dreamed. So he agreed to the sale, choosing a buyer that would ensure the meteorite would be preserved and studied rather than locked away in some private vault. The day the deal was finalized, Miguel held the check in his hands, struggling to comprehend the numbers printed on it. It was more money than he had ever thought possible, the kind of wealth that could rewrite the course of his life. And so, for the first time in years, he allowed himself to dream beyond the boundaries of survival. He paid off every debt that had weighed on his family for generations. He renovated his modest home, not into a mansion, but into a comfortable place where his children could grow without worry. He purchased new farming equipment, not just for himself, but for struggling neighbors who had fought the same battles he had for years. He built a community fund to help local farmers recover from bad harvests and offered scholarships to young students who had once, like him, believed their futures were bound to the limitations of their circumstances. Though wealth had changed his circumstances, it had not changed his heart. Miguel remained the same man who woke with the sun, who still found solace in the scent of damp soil, who still measured his days by the rhythm of the land. But now, he no longer worked out of desperation. He worked out of love, out of gratitude, out of the knowledge that he had been given a rare and powerful opportunity. And so, while the meteorite now sat behind glass in a renowned research facility, its legacy lived on in the lives it had touched, not through scientific discovery alone, but through the quiet, immeasurable impact of one man's choice to share his fortune with those who needed it most. As the years passed, Miguel's story became something of a legend in his small town. People spoke of the humble farmer who had once struggled to make ends meet, only to have fate intervene in the most extraordinary way. Some called it luck, others destiny, but Miguel himself saw it differently. To him, the meteorite had not been a miracle, it had been a test, a moment in which the universe had placed a choice in his hands. Wealth, he had realized, did not define a person. It merely amplified who they already were. He could have taken the money and disappeared into a life of luxury, but that was never who he was. Instead, he remained true to his roots, using his fortune not as an escape, but as a tool to build something greater. He had turned an otherworldly gift into a legacy that would outlast him, one that would continue to uplift those around him for generations to come. His land flourished, no longer at the mercy of failing equipment and unpredictable seasons. His children had access to an education he had never dreamed of for himself. And most importantly, his community, his friends, his neighbors, had found hope in his story. Because if a man like Miguel, who had spent his life with his hands in the soil, could see his world change in an instant, then perhaps, just perhaps, fortune could find its way to anyone. His story serves as a reminder that sometimes life's greatest treasures are hidden in the most unexpected places, that the value of what we find is not just in its worth, but in what we choose to do with it, and that even the most ordinary among us can, one day, hold something extraordinary in our hands. Because luck, Miguel believed, was not just about finding a meteorite. It was about knowing what to do with it once it landed at your feet.